Well, thanks a lot for giving us the opportunity to give an update on the DARWIN EU activities, and especially for this community, I think it's great to share how we are using OMOP and a lot of the processes and tooling for this regulatory space. So I'm very happy to give you an update, short introduction. Also, I'm very happy that I could share a few slides from the European Medicines Agency as introduction. And then I will hand it over to Ed, who will talk about the development of analytical pipelines in DARWIN EU. And then finally, Katia will talk about ongoing studies that we are currently doing in the DARWIN EU Coordination Center. That being said, I of course cannot speak on behalf of the European Medicines Agency, so we do not speak on the EMA nor its European Medicines Regulatory Network. But as I mentioned earlier, of course, we work very closely together, and I'm happy to share the first 4 or 5 slides from EMA to give you a little bit more context on why DARWIN was set up and what the ambitions are. So it all started with a big strategy on enabling the use of real-world evidence across the spectrum of regulatory use cases. This was initiated by the Big Data Task Force and others early on, and this is something that EMA has been pushing for through many different endeavors. One thing that I definitely want to share is this nice slide that was created by EMA, referring to a publication that I can recommend you to have a look at, where EMA explains why it's so important to use real-world evidence and what's actually needed to enable that use at scale for regulatory decision making. Facilitating the access, building the procedures and all the standards and methods, etc. And this is exactly what we are implementing now also within the DARWIN EU initiative. And the European Medicines Agency has different methods of using real-world data already. So they have data in-house, primary care health records from France, Germany, UK, Italy, Spain, and Romania. Those are actually mapped to the common data model, so that's good. But they also have another mechanism to execute studies, and that's through so-called framework contracts, where contracts need to be set up, where multiple teams can apply. It's kind of an open tender process. And then contracts need to be set up, and these studies need to be executed across those networks, which is, of course, time-consuming, but it's still a mechanism that EMA is using next to DARWIN EU initiative. And DARWIN EU is being set up to really scale up the use of real-world data, and as I will explain a little bit later, we are currently in the establishment phase of the DARWIN EU initiative, and Erasmus MC has been selected to represent the DARWIN EU Coordination Center and lead a lot of this effort. What's important to realize is that questions from EMA are coming from many different committees through the full pipeline of the medicinal product, or the full life cycle of the medicinal products. And you see here a lot of abbreviations that all refer to certain committees that EMA has set up to answer questions in different stages of the product life cycle. Especially, of course, the post-authorization space is interesting, where we can use the large databases to look at all kinds of safety questions, for example. But besides that, there are also other alternatives, especially in situations of crisis planning and response, looking at the vaccines, the safety of the vaccines, and post-authorization, of course, has recently also been a very big topic, where we have been able to contribute also with OMOP studies earlier on, even before the initiation of the DARWIN EU Coordination Center. Now, DARWIN EU is therefore a kind of spider in the web. You see it nicely on the right, with EMA asking for studies that have been asked by their committees, Coordination Center picking up these questions, doing all kinds of feasibility steps through procedures that we have set up in the last year, And that's is a pretty big throughput already. And maybe Katia talks a little bit more about that later. But in that process, we are assessing whether databases are actually suitable to answer the specific question, and all the steps are being taken, and Katia will explain those steps in more depth. What you also see quite interestingly on that, on the right side, you see data permit authorities. So that's a concept that's been built up in Europe, highly related to the European health data space, which is a very big European-wide initiative to enable the access to data for clinical research, but also for patient care. And one of the ideas is that countries could set up a data permit authority that could handle all the requests coming to databases in the specific countries. Some countries are making good progress. Like, for example, in Finland, there's an organization that can handle multiple hospitals and will help distributing that the code, but also facilitating the governance procedures for those databases. So these are big developments that are ongoing in Europe, and I don't have much time to talk about that in depth now. But the upcoming years is really going to be a change in Europe, how we handle data, and this has been moved forward quite quickly, actually. Also in the Netherlands, we are exploring the setup of a data permit authority, and we are slowly making progress there. On the other hand, of course, we have the individual data partners that we contract, and they run studies against their own CDM. But the coordination center is represented by the Erasmus Medical Center, with me being the executive director. But Dani and Katia are a very good support, and the three of us are actually leading together the establishment and the operations of the DARWIN EU Coordination Center, with a large team, of course, of people behind that, because it's a very big and ambitious project. And that's definitely demonstrated by the number of studies that we have to execute in Darwin over time. And we are currently in phase 2, where we are working on 16 studies at the moment. But the later phases, phase 3, and then definitely option 1 and option 2, the number of studies per year is increasing considerably. So in the last 2 years, it's more than 150 studies or so per year, and that has impact on how we set up our procedures and our tooling. And I'll talk a bit more about that in a second. Of course, we had to deliver studies also in phase 1, and I think we are very good on schedule with that. There's one complex study being finalized now, but also for phase 2, we are working according plan, and I'm actually pretty proud that we have been able to deliver that and are in a good shape now. Also good to mention that in DARWIN EU, the coordination center is contracted on a year-by-year basis. So every year the contract needs to be extended. And I'm very happy to share that it has been extended now also to phase 3. So we can start preparing for that and continue our interesting journey here. Now, DARWIN EU is really implementing a paradigm shift on the use of real-world data for regulatory purposes. And it's not a matter of just increasing the number of people that are involved in these studies. We have to be much smarter, and therefore it's so fantastic that we can build on all the effort that has been done by OHDSI on the common data model, the tooling and processes. So this is also thanks to many people that are on the call now that we are able to implement this at this scale in Europe. It means that we need to work on, as you all are very much aware of, data interoperability. Common data model is the core of Darwin, the OMOP CDM. We're building standardized analytics to answer many different types of questions. Katia will go a bit more in depth. And then there's a technical infrastructure and the data network that we need to set up. Another very important component for me is creating the research memory. So how can we be more efficient in reusing things that we learned from previous studies, and think about phenotypes or concept sets or any other insights that we generate from specific studies on availability of data or time delays that we get because of governance board procedure. Each individual study is a learning process, and It's very nice to see also that the team behind all of this is learning something from every study, and we then always try to optimize the procedures or optimize the tools to even better answer the questions that the European Medicines Agency may have. Data interoperability, of course, done through the OMO Common Data Model, and I'm speaking to the converted already here. We aim to include databases that are already mapped to the OMO CDM initially, but there's also room for a few databases that may still need to be mapped, and therefore the Coordination Center will support that process. The selection of data partners is done through an open call, a continuously open call, and you can find the link here, where there are multiple cutoff dates, and the next one is the 31st of October, where EMA will again define or select the data partners for the next phase, and we will then contact these data partners to get them onboarded, following a onboarding procedure that is using a couple of tools also from the OHDSI community. So in this process, all the way on the left, we have some initial conversations with the data partners, whether the value proposition that we have for them is of interest, and then we'll have a call with these data partners, the meeting with the DARWIN EU Coordination Center, and where we will try to better understand their data based on a big questionnaire that they filled in the open call. And we go through a process with them on quality control of the ETL, where we use tools from OHDSI, the DQD. That quality dashboard is an important one. But we also, of course, use Achilles to run, and part of that information in Achilles is moved into a automatically generated report called the onboarding report. That tool is based on what we have developed in Eden, where we can run the tool against a CDM, and it will create a Word document in a template approved by the European Medicines Agency, and we go through all the aspects in that document. For example, the quality or the level of mappings, the insights in the trends of the data over time coming from Achilles, etc. But also some extrinsic metadata that we cannot measure directly from the CDM, like their governance procedures and all these aspects. They will then share that document with the Coordination Center. We will review that with them, and finally, when we go through all these iterative steps with them, we will submit an onboarding document based on that automatically generated document to the European Medicines Agency, and they will hopefully approve that, and then the contract arrangements will be set up. Now, we've done a lot of work, and especially the management pillar led by Synapse, to set up all kind of framework contracts and work orders to speed up the process and have a one-off framework contract, but then per study a working order to speed up that whole process. This is time consuming, but we have a good process now to onboard databases rather quickly now for the second round. And all these databases will also be added in a catalog based on the Eden catalog, where we have a lot of insights in the counts of the different concepts in the CDM, and that's helpful for feasibility studies. The data partners that have been onboarded so far in phase 1, you can see them here, but this is being expanded. We are currently working with the onboarding process of another 10 databases that before the end of the year hopefully are onboarded, with also some very, very large databases in Europe that has showed interest. Interestingly, I think it was more than 60 databases signed up to be part of Darwin, so there's a lot of interest, and I hope this will continue. And if you are in Europe and you're listening to this call and you're interested, do have a look at the website and see how you can be involved there. Standardized analytics we are building. I'm not going to go in depth here because Ed will go in much more depth later. One thing I like to mention is that one of the challenges, as we have already identified when writing the proposal, is the alignment on the requirements for these analytics. Can we come to a consensus on what we mean with a certain study design? And we have mechanisms for that now in Darwin with deliverables on the data, on the catalog of analytics, where Ed will talk more about in a few seconds. Around technical infrastructure, a lot of work happened, and I have no time to go in depth here, and maybe there will be other mechanisms to share some of these results or this work with the OHDSI community. But we're currently, for example, working heavily on using Arachne and working on the data nodes side to make it fit for purpose for our Darwin network to speed up the studies. We've set up things like the service desk. We've rolled out internally, and we'll also roll out to data partners and others. And we're working on tools like the phenotype library for Darwin, which is a pretty nice tool, but also great that we can co-create that tool with EMA, and have had some workshops on phenotype development together with EMA, which I think is a very nice step forward. Have a look at the website for all kind of other details. Then my final slide is just to share with you the evolution of the coordination center, or how it's been set up. There are multiple pillars with all kind of teams under them. A development pillar where a lot of development around the methods, the analytical tools, the dashboarding, the Shiny apps, training material, protocol templates are happening. Operations in the middle, this is really the core, and of course a lot of activity already, but even more in the upcoming years, where we do a study execution and also the network management, so onboarding the databases, doing the quality control, repeating those assessments on a yearly basis, etc. Technology pillar with all the infrastructure development, and then very importantly also the management pillar, where a lot of work has been done on the development of all the procedures, etc. So we do this together, as I showed you earlier, with multiple subcontractors that all have their own expertise, and together I think we have been able to build a good team, a growing team as well, as you can imagine. But I'm very proud that on the space where we are now and how we are moving forward in the upcoming period. With that, I'd like to hand over to you, Ed, and I'll be driving your slides. So you have to say next slide to me every time you want the next slide.
Okay, happy to do that. Thank you, Peter, and yeah, thanks everyone for coming along to hear about DARWIN EU. So I'll be talking about some of the work we've been doing in the development pillar. So next slide, please. Next slide. And so, yeah, just to start, I just wanted to underline kind of the scale of the ambition of this project. So we're talking about creating the infrastructure and a system and a network that's able to generate 145 studies in 2025 across 40 data partners. So this is quite the ambitious undertaking. And yeah, so in the development pillar, we're really kind of trying to produce all the tools needed to deliver this quantity of studies, producing to the kind of level of quality required, and also providing the answers in the format that the EMA need. Next slide, please. Yeah, and you can just fast forward through some of these animations, but just to put this in context, I think is just this: we're part of the OHDSI community, which is growing quickly over time, and we're having many publications, and we're having many network studies. I think a couple more animations to skip forward, please. But I think everybody that's kind of been involved in these network studies has probably come to the conclusion at some point along the process that they're a difficult undertaking, and often they take a lot of time. They take a lot of cajoling of data partners and getting things running in different environments and different database management systems. And when they come off, it's been great, but there's always been challenges because it's just inherently a difficult problem to solve, to do that coordination between everybody and get everything running everywhere. The next slide, please. And yeah, some more animations to skip, I'm afraid. So as Peter mentioned, we've got the catalogue, which is really driving the development in Darwin, and this is describing the types of studies available for the EMA to ask for. And although there's a couple more buckets, these are two of the main buckets, which is off-the-shelf studies versus complex. So really, the off-the-shelf studies are typically kind of descriptive epidemiology, whereas once we get to the complex, this is where we more get into causal inference, and the biggest difference is the timelines. So off-the-shelf studies need to be done quickly. Next slide, please. And yeah, this is kind of how I'm thinking about what we're doing in the development pillar, and that's building tools. So we're really providing the tools to the study operations pillar that we'll hear more about from Katia, so that they can prepare the code and deliver the studies needed and answer their research questions. Next slide. And yeah, these tools we're developing, but they're really being developed for other people. So we're really fortunate, not just that we've got this catalog describing what we need to be able to do, but we've also got the people using the tools around the corner, sitting on desks next to us, where we're working either at Oxford or Erasmus or elsewhere. And these tools we're making are really designed to be easy to use for these people, so that they can interact with them, assemble their study code and get the results they need, and really focus on the clinical question at hand, rather than kind of needing lots and lots of experience using R and yeah, just to make it kind of a comfortable and enjoyable experience for them to do a study. Next slide, please. And so just to kind of give an illustration of hopefully what these tools are mostly aimed to do, here's a paper from before Darwin that we were doing during COVID times. Well, maybe we're still in those, but this was to look at the background rates of different adverse of interest. So this is actually one of those second type of studies that Peter mentioned, where there was an open tender and we were doing the incidence of these background events of interest. We've got the GitHub repo public, and if you look into that, what you'll see is that was a lot of work. There was lots of lines of code written, and it required, yeah, a lot of work to put it together and get the results we needed for this seemingly quite simple analysis of background rates. Next slide, please. And some more animations to skip through, but this is really to show that what we're doing here is building tools that kind of mean that we don't have to worry about lots of the kind of 50 lines of code that we might have previously needed, that we can turn into one line of code, and we can then assemble that to do the study we need. So we've got packages that are all of these are on CRAN and available to anyone to use, like CDM connector, patient profiles, incidence prevalence I'll talk a little bit more about, but these are providing the functionality for users that make their lives that little bit easier. Next slide, please. And then this is the result in that, as compared to that previous study, in this screenshot of the code from a Darwin study, now we're talking about 120 lines of code. So there's still some knowledge of R needed to use those R packages, but it's going from thousands of lines of R code to perhaps 100 to 200. So this then makes preparing an off-the-shelf study a matter of days rather than a matter of weeks. Next slide, please. And so just to take one example that I know probably as well as all the packages, which would be the incidence prevalence one. So here we've got an R package that's kind of very obvious what it does, which is calculate incidence and prevalence. And we've got very descriptive names and so on. And that's to calculate estimate period prevalence and estimate incidence. And these functions can be used by people assembling their study code. And those incidence rates can be used for any number of different studies. So they can be part of, from the catalogue, they could be part of a drug utilization study, population level descriptive epidemiology, but also provide the basis of doing RMM effectiveness and other time series methods. Next slide, please. So one thing to mention with developing all these packages, as well as trying to make them easy to use, there's a lot of work, and I'm taking credit for a lot of other people's work here, but there's a lot of work that goes into making them well tested and ready to be used for studies for the EMA. So there's thousands of unit tests to be written, and there's also a lot of thought into the way those unit tests should work, the edge cases that might come up when running a network study across different databases. As well as kind of the internal unit tests that are run, we also try and provide some functions. For example, this benchmark one, that when a data partner starts using one of the packages, they can quickly run this and just make sure the package is going to work for their database, because it's going to test pretty much all the different types of analyses that that package could do. And then there's a good feeling that they're ready to go for a study. Next slide, please. So as well as the unit testing, there's also a lot of work we've been doing around face validity. So in these examples, we're comparing the results we got from this incidence prevalence package to a previous study that was done using more custom code. So that's on the left-hand side. So you can see we found really good agreement with those two approaches, which really gives us a lot of confidence in that this package we've created can generate the same results as you get through these many lines of bespoke code. And then also we were comparing the incidence you see from two databases, CPRD and CityApp, against what was being reported in those countries. So that gives us some confidence that the results we're getting have face validity from the packages. Next slide, please. As well as making sure they're well tested and easy to use, performance is also important. So as part of the network, we're also running kind of benchmarking of the different packages to kind of make sure that they're usable and they'll get us all the results we need in time. So unsurprisingly, the code is going to run quicker for smaller data sets. It's also quite dependent on people's different environments. So it needs a lot of work to kind of make sure everybody's environments are set up as well as possible. But this is also a way to just make sure the code's running and to have a good prediction of how long a study will take to run. So here in this example, we're doing an incidence for 8 different cohorts and prevalence as well. Next slide, please. So yeah, this is kind of showing the level of kind of thought and work a lot of people have been doing to look at these packages. So this is a really nice package led by Martin at Erasmus, which will provide us a review of your software. So you make this R package and it will make a nice presentation of all the functions that you're exporting and how they all relate to each other. It will also kind of summarize the different amounts of code that are being used and so on. So in this example, we can see this is a map of all the functions and incidence prevalence, and then we can see this is a little over 5,000 lines of R code that does all the work. Next slide, please. As well as that, we can see more kind of numbers on the different functions. We can see kind of the number of arguments and lines of code and the complexity of the different functions in the package. Unsurprisingly, when there's lots of lines of code, lots of arguments, you end up with complex code. But this is really kind of focusing towards what areas of the code we need to refactor to make our code base maintainable over the next few years to be running studies for the EMA. Next slide, please. And as well as all this, there's also efforts to disseminate the results. So we've got this package on CRAN. We presented at some of the OHDSI symposium. So that was a really nice experience to show people what we've made. And we're also submitting papers to kind of to demo how the package is being made and how to use them in practice. And next slide, please. Yeah, so just in summary, all this work and development is kind of aimed at this idea of being able to generate all this evidence we want to be able to generate in 2025. So this is really driven by that catalogue of data analyses with lots of testing to ensure validity and usability of the packages we've created. Flexibility in the design so that we can expect that over time the catalogue is going to evolve and change, and we need to be able to change our code base to acknowledge that. Extensibility, so for example, that idea of RMM effectiveness studies, being able to use incidence prevalence to provide the basis of what you need and then allowing that modelling afterwards. And then also this real push to get the R packages on CRAN with thorough documentation so that they can be used not just by people in Darwin, they can be used by the data partners themselves when they're doing studies, but also by the wider OHDSI community. And I think with that, I can hand over to Katia.
Hello, everyone. So I'm Katia Verhamme. I'm going to give you some update on study operations. Peter, if you can go. Yeah. So this is a slide explaining the type of studies that we do within Darwin. And perhaps I'll start with the off-the-shelf studies. And off-the-shelf studies, these are studies where we work with a generic protocol, where we have specific codes already available as part of the pipelines. And typical studies would be studies where we look into the prevalence incidence of drugs or of diseases. We have complex studies, and complex studies would be studies where we have a complex phenotype, for instance, or where specific analytical code need to be written for that specific study to answer the research questions. And then we have very complex studies, and very complex studies are studies where we say they cannot rely on data only, for instance, from electronic healthcare databases, or which would require extremely complicated methodological work. And it would be data studies, for instance, where we need to add additional data, prospectively, for instance, collecting data. And I had the routine repeated, Peter, sorry. And then the routine repeated, so I wanted to follow the order more or less. Routine repeated would mean that it's a repetition of studies that we have done in the past. So for instance, an off-the-shelf study, which could be repeated, for instance, looking in the subsequent year to drug use, monitoring safety of a medicinal product, not only this period, but following it up over time. So these are routine repeated analysis. Next, please. This slide has already been shown, so we are now currently in year 2. We are looking into a period of 5 years, and as you can see, the number of studies, all studies, routine repeated, off-the-shelf, complex, and then also for very complex studies at the end will increase. And for year 2, we currently are working on 14 off-the-shelf studies. As we haven't done that many studies last year, we are not going to do any routine repeated studies this year, but this has been replaced by additional off-the-shelf studies. So 14 off-the-shelf studies and 4 complex studies. Next, please. How do we organize ourselves? And this is a very important slide, and perhaps start at the right. So we, of course, this is done in collaboration with EMA, who comes with specific research questions, in collaboration with data partners, of course, because use of their data is crucial. And then also the Darwin Coordination Center. So we're now looking into study operations, but as Peter said, we have other pillars like network pillars, the network pillar, development pillar, technology pillar, and management pillar, and all of us collaborate in order to run studies. How do we organize a conduct of a study? We start with study exploration, which you see on top. And what does it mean? We receive a specific question by EMA. That question arises from committees from EMA, and then we are going to check whether we have the data, and we use the Darwin portal for that. But we're also going to check whether we already have the analytical code. And definitely this will be done in case it's an off-the-shelf study, because off-the-shelf study would mean that we wouldn't need to write study-specific analytical code. If EMA, so we complete a study feasibility assessment, we return it to EMA, and if EMA agrees to go ahead, we move to the study initiation phase, where we are going to work or have a work order form signed by data partners. We contact data partners, ask whether they want to contribute. If they agree, we sign the work order form. We're going to create a study team consisting of, at minimum, a principal investigator and a data analyst, and it's going to grow for more complex studies. And then we also check for that study team whether there's a potential conflict of interest. The next step is the study implementation phase, which is the largest phase with regard to the amount of work that it asks. So we're going to work on a study outline and a protocol according to the Sept template. And if EMA agrees on the protocol, we're going to upload the protocol to the EU Pass Register. We need to work with around IRB approval, and then we're going to have internal and external kickoff meetings. External means meeting with bases and data partners to explain the study. We work on phenotyping, we will run cohort diagnostics, do work on the study packages, and then do a test run. And if we are happy with results, we move to the study execution, where data partners are asked to run study packages. Data partners are asked to check quality of the results. If they are happy, the results are uploaded to a digital research environment, and then the results are reviewed by, at minimum, the principal investigator. And then if this goes smoothly, we move to the study dissemination, where we're going to work on a study report according to the Sept template. If that study report is agreed, we're going to upload it to the EU Pass Register. We will work on the manuscript generation, and then do the study archiving. Peter, can you move to the next slide, please? What kind of studies did we do in year one? So we did 4 studies in total, 3 off the shelf and 1 complex study. What you see on this table is the committees who asked for the studies and where the study request came from, the specific study titles, the study type, whether it's off the shelf or complex, the type of analysis that we use, where we differentiate between disease epidemiology, drug utilization study, population epidemiology, for instance, the type of databases, and for some studies we have more databases, for complex studies often fewer databases, and then the status. And you also see some numbers here, and this relates to the fact that these studies were presented at the ISPI conference of last week. Next slide, Peter. So year 2, what happened? We have received 22 feasibility requests, of which 10 studies currently received green light. 3 studies were suggested to put on hold for different reasons, but often lack of data or need of more recent data. And then we have 7 feasibility assessments, which were either just received or are currently under review by EMA. And if we look into the studies that we are doing for year 2, so if you go to the next, you move on, Peter. Yeah, so okay, so what kind of studies do we have? Again, off-the-shelf studies, complex studies. I'm not going to go to them all, but the principle is the same. You see the committees and the EMA committees who ask for the studies, the type of study, the type of analysis, and the type of databases, and then the status. And it's disease epidemiology, drug utilization studies, yeah, complex studies, and so on. So Peter, can you go to the next slide? Yeah, continuation of the studies that we are doing. So now I'm showing those studies where protocol has been approved by EMA and where the protocols have been, or the studies have been uploaded to the EU PASS register. So this is information that I can share with you. So use drug utilization studies on naloxone and drugs with prokinetic properties, and then there's a complex study which is going to happen on the effectiveness of COVID-19 vaccines. Next, Peter. So I have already shown this slide, and I think Peter and Ed alluded on this as well. So as you can see, the number of studies is going to increase a lot, especially in year 5, where we're going to have 60 routine repeated, 60 off the shelf, 24 complex studies, and 1 very complex study. Next, Peter. And of course, in order to achieve that, I mean, this cannot be done by ourselves. And so we have had so far great collaboration with all of the database partners. And I'm showing here on this slide the database partners from year 1. So not only extreme good collaboration with the database partners, but of course also good collaboration internally with people from the Darwin Coordination Center. And then of course also the colleagues from EMA, and then in particular, the people from the real world evidence group. And as we are growing the number of studies, we are of course also interested to grow our team, increase the number of people within our team. And I want to share with you that we are currently also looking for, or we have 2 vacancies for clinical epidemiologists at Department of Medical Informatics at Erasmus Medical Center. So if you would be interested to apply, please do so. And I think, Peter, this was my last slide. I think you have 1 closure slide.
Correct. Thanks a lot, Ed and Katia. Yeah, just want to share these slides with some links and also an email address if you want to contact us. And there's also a newsletter from EMA that has many issues by now, so you can also sign up for that or subscribe to get more information there. With that, I'll hand it back to you, Craig. So we only have 5 minutes left for
yeah,
some questions.
Great. Yeah. Thank you so much. Christian's got his hand up first, so let's. There are some questions in the chat, so the chat will be accessible afterwards if people want to go back. But Christian, go ahead.
Yeah, no, thanks, Peter and Katia and Ed. I need to ask a picky question. This is a wonderful project, and obviously I was involved for a while, but I need to ask a picky question. Initially, this used to be a consortium based on some organizations from the OHDSI community. We don't hear any of that anymore. It's now all Erasmus and a little bit of Oxford. So I wanted to just find out whether that's still the case and whether we should give them like the necessary credit and describe what they do and how this all works together in a community sense. And the second question is about the transparency and openness of the whole thing. Initially, that's how Darwin was at least proposed, that things that happen will be visible and accessible. Ed described his intention to go on CRAN for the software, but of course, same question applies to the studies and to the details of the studies and the phenotypes and all this kind of stuff. So right now, I think lots of people in the community who would like to at least know what's going on, if not help or contribute, don't know whether there is a way to actually get that information.
Yeah, let me try to answer your picky questions.
Yeah.
No, so I think I've been clear. I'm showing the slide again. So I shared with you the subcontractors. We do not have time to go in depth in all the contribution of individual organizations, but it must be clear that that these organizations are all contributing to this, as I mentioned earlier. Also, Odysseus and the Hive programmers are coming from these organizations. The Hive is very actively involved in the quality control, for example, of the data partners that are entering the Darwin Center or the Darwin Network. Same with Acuvia, where we are working on the study repository, and so I can go on and on and on with all these things. So I hope I made clear that this is a collaborative effort of these organizations, and of course I thank all of them for that. It's definitely not only the people that you speak to now. I think you know that, but I like to reinforce that for everybody in the community. On the openness, I think yes. We are, as far as we can, also within the constraints of the European Medicines Agency. I think the protocols are all being pushed to NCEP, and they are there. Also, results, Shiny apps, and result reports are all there. Code, it's not our ambition to put things in CRAN. We have already all our pipelines in CRAN, at least most of them are there already. And the same will happen also with, not to CRAN, but in our GitHub with the study code themselves. When EMA allows us to share that, we will also publish those for each of the studies, so you can actually run it on your own data. So with respect to transparency, I don't feel actually any issues there, as far as I know. On the other hand, of course, a lot of the activities are also going on in the backstage until we can actually share results. So as Katia already demonstrated, some of the studies we can share that are ongoing because they are at NCEP, and some are still in either feasibility stage or ongoing, and we cannot share yet. But this is all aligned with EMA. It's definitely our purpose not to hide anything here.
Let's go for one more quickly, Aza.
Thank you. Thank you, Peter, and everybody. Oops. Echoing. Oops.
All right, I think you're muted now.
That's
better. Yep.
Okay, perfect. I have a quick question. Peter, you mentioned you're working on a tooling for a phenotype library. Just wondering if will that include making the JSON of the phenotype definition public in those in that phenotype library?
Yeah. So we are working with that also with EMA now, how to share these things. But definitely the idea is to make these phenotypes all public, so we can share them with the community, and that will include also the JSON files if they have been created to Atlas, which is the case in I think all of them until now. Yeah. But also includes the concept sets and the rationale for each individual item to include them or exclude them. There's a lot of effort being done, and it will be good at another moment maybe to share in more depth what we are doing there, and that may be useful for everyone else. All of that would also be in open source, of course.